This is a story that even some secular professors of literature would say is one of the greatest stories ever told, the parable of the prodigal son. Some people, the German theologian Helmut Thielicke refers to it as the parable of the waiting father. I like that. The parable of the waiting father. You know the story, the young son comes and he asks for his share of the inheritance. He's extraordinarily rude to his father. It's greedy, it's thoughtless, it's probably impulsive. And most fathers would say, wait your turn and work hard. You know, the fact that he even asks for it probably is an indication he's not ready to handle it. So the father talks to his financial advisors and talks to his attorney and pulls some of the cash out of the business, postpones the purchase of some equipment, and hands the younger son what he's asking for. And again, it's incredibly rude. What the son is saying to his father is, I want my stuff, and getting my stuff right now is more important to me than being with you. You know the story, and so the youngest son takes what he's given and he goes away. They don't hear from him. They hear from him periodically. He's in big cities, New York, New Orleans, San Francisco, Rio de Janeiro, and then it goes quiet. It's interesting what the older son says, of course, is he's wasted his money on prostitutes, but the story doesn't say that, does it? And so the young boy goes off, and then he comes home with his tail between his legs, with some mumbled story about "I'm sorry." And you know the story. The older brother, the one who's followed all the rules, who's stayed behind, who's worked hard, he hears the party going on. He discovers that his dad has invited the folks from Wagner Ribs to come over with their grill. He hears the DJ and says, "It's your brother, he's back." You know, the brother seething with self-righteousness, the unfairness of it all. He stands out in the shadows, works on an old Ford tractor. It's a hobby of his. His father comes out, and his father asks why he's not coming to the party. It's an amazing exchange. This son of yours doesn't even want to claim him as his son of yours. Father invites the Lord to the party. It's interesting. Jesus is such a good storyteller. Jesus is such a good preacher that he doesn't tell us how the story ends, does he? Doesn't tell us. We don't know if the older brother goes to the party or not. We don't know if the older brother stays out, seething with self. We don't know what happens next, but I want to say that this is a story where what we see happening is Father chooses not to try to control things, but to love. He decides, and we'll talk about this for just a moment, he decides that he's not going to control the boy. Sometimes as parents we try to control our kids, don't we? And we do that for good reasons sometimes. I mean, I can remember this is a silly story. It's not in the sermon. But that never stops me. And so I remember when our oldest was in high school setting an alarm clock outside the bedroom door so that the alarm would go off. If he was supposed to be home by midnight, the alarm would go off at midnight. And our son didn't understand why we did that. I said, "I worry about you. I can't really sleep well." He said, "You've got to be kidding me." He says, "I have to yell to wake you up when I come home." And then he said, "Dad, you realize all I have to do is go to the house and turn the alarm off and go back out." So the father chooses not to control the son, and we laugh about it. But you know, he could have put in place a series of covenants and agreement and say to him, you know, if you ever want to drive your Ford 250 again, if you ever want to have the signet ring of the family back on your hand, here are the things you will do, and here are the things you will not do. We call those core values or a behavioral covenant in a business. And I can remember talking to an attorney years ago, a financial planner, and we talked about how much do we as parents try to control our adult children by the way we write our will. So he chooses not to control the son. I don't know how the story's going to end, but I'm not going to punish you, I'm not going to shame you, I'm not going to lecture you, I'm not going to chain you up with all kinds of restrictions. I'm going to welcome you home. I'm going to hug you so that your "I'm sorry" story gets muffled. He decides not to control the family. He's not going to kind of figure out how to finesse this so that everybody's happy. The older brother's happy. The younger brother's happy. He's going to be just gracious enough that the younger brother feels loved, but he's not going to be so gracious that the older brother is outraged. Chooses not to try to control the whole family so that everybody is happy. Never try to control the family so everybody is outrageously gracious, and he knows it may blow the family doesn't know how the story is. And he chooses also not to try to control his own reputation and his appearance and what people think of him. I sort of had the feeling that this is a story that probably took place in Couts, outside Couts. Couts is still in Porter County, right? Yeah. So I was trying to figure out, where's a farm town in Porter County? We're a strange county. We don't have a lot of farm towns, but down in Couts. So people who go to the church, they're in the parking lot before worship and they talk to one another. That old man did what? Has he lost his mind? Over coffee, there would be whispers about the same thing. And at the Stark County grain elevator, the truck drivers and farmers would gather around the coffee pot. And they said, what a weak excuse for it. So he chooses to give up control. People in the county may think he's crazy. People at the First Church in Couts may think he's a weak excuse for poverty. How the story ends. So we're in this series, Emotionally Healthy Life. We're a couple more weeks, in 2 weekends in August, and then we'll wrap up. But just a couple of things that I would say today. I would also just remind you that Peter Scazzaro in his book talks about the walls we face. And he says that one of the keys in life is not to avoid the walls, is not to pretend the wall isn't there, but it is to let God work as we go through the wall. Another word for that might be crisis. Okay? After this is a rather personal sermon, but after I went and decided to retire, I went through a wall. I spent a couple of months down in the mountains of Mexico helping a little church in the mountains. And then I was helping a United Methodist congregation in Auburn, Indiana, kind of rediscover themselves and rediscover the joy of God. And I lived alone in a 4-bedroom house through COVID. And I continued to work with a wonderful Roman Catholic Italian counselor named Tony Berardi in South Bend. We would see each other every week or every other week all through COVID. And I was, to the rest of the world, I think I looked good. But there were times and I had the sense that something was slipping away. But I got through that, and on the other side of the wall, I had the weird experience after this terribly painful experience on the other side of the wall. I had people who had known me for years. They would say this to me: you are different. What? They would say, you are different. I would say, you are lighter. You are more present. You are more at peace. You never know what it's going to be like when you go through the wall and let God work. And so that was just a part of my journey. And I look back now and I realize that one of the great mistakes of my life was working so hard to be in control. To make it look like things were fine, that's always been my word, fine or okay. It's always fine. It's always okay. Even if my arm's been cut off, I'm fine. To make it look like things were fine. And this need to be in control kept me from speaking uncomfortable, courageous, destabilizing truth. Have you ever known anything in your heart and you didn't want to say it because you didn't want to have to clean up? So I think actually some courageous truth earlier in my life would have been a good thing. I always will remember doing such a good job of hiding all that. And I can remember when I was a pastor in Bloomington, in a very large downtown church, and my dad and I would exchange emails every week. He was in his 80s, a retired physician, and I can remember sending a note to my dad, and finally, after a lifetime of hiding, confessing to him what I was going through. And I expected my dad to react with anger, or just say, "Buck up, Buckaroo." Send me back a note. I saw that. So you give up control and you begin to live with honesty. I remember that one time in Elkhart, in the church there, we decided to do a sermon series on courage. And as a part of that, they filmed me doing a static line jump out of an airplane at 4,000 feet over Goshen. And I can remember that I had the courage to do that. I had the courage to, with the chute on the back of my outfit, the jump master said, step out. And I stepped out, and then I held on to the strut of the airplane with my hands, body parallel to the aircraft, and then courage to do that. So, letting go of control. I found it hard to let go of the need to control people and events in my own image. And after all, pastors are divinely sent experts at being okay, aren't we? So as we wrap up this morning, just a couple of things that Peter Scazzaro says. To stop pretending and stop trying to control everything and everyone means greater brokenness. And so what that means is we don't have to be thin-skinned and defensive. One of my lay mentors in the church I serve, I love Craig an awful lot. I told you one time he did my evaluation. He was head of staff parish. And he told me at the end of the evaluation, you are thin-skinned and defensive. What do I say to that? But we don't have to be defensive. But we can claim the fact that our front legs are falling off. I don't have to pretend. So when somebody comes up to me and they say, you're kind of a mess, I can argue with them. I can tell them they don't know what's going on. Or I can say, oh yeah, all my friends tell me that too. I learned that a long time ago. And so we become less offendable, and also we become less prone to critiquing other people. It's a little hard for me to critique you because your front legs fell off, when I know that my front legs did what? They fell off. Greater brokenness. And then greater appreciation for mystery. And what's that mean? It means that we know that we don't know everything. Right? I think one of the wonderful things about being a teenager is you do know everything. Sorry, and then you get older and you realize that you didn't know everything. get so nervous around Christians who think they know it all. Because they don't. God is very big. And in fact, in Ephesians, when Paul says in one of my favorite verses of the Bible, he says, I'm down on my knees praying that you would understand the height and the breadth of the knowledge and the love of God. And then he says, but it's beyond knowledge. You can't know it. In 1 Corinthians 13, he says, in this world we look through dark smoke glass towards God. And then he says this, in this life we know only in. So greater brokenness, we can not spend a lot of energy judging other people or defending ourselves as perfect little alabaster statues. There's a greater appreciation for mystery. It's a big universe. And God is very, very big, right? Yes? Yes. So a little humility is a good thing. And in fact, as I was writing the sermon this week, I just stumbled across this phrase, openness to divine surprises. So a greater appreciation for mystery in our lives. And then a greater appreciation to wait on God. Remember the story of Joseph in Genesis? Remember that story? And how long it takes for Joseph, how many years it takes for Joseph to get to a point where as he stands in front of his father and his brothers down in Egypt, after he's been sold into slavery, after he worked for Potiphar, Potiphar's wife, after he spent time in prison as an interpreter, after he's been a viceroy of Egypt all those years, and finally, at the end of the story, he says, what you meant for evil, God has used for. Jesus, after the crucifixion and resurrection, he gathers his followers together and he says, you're going to be my witnesses to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the world, Warren County, Lake County, Chicago, Sudan, Chad, Georgia. Don't have what you need for what God's done. So we wait on God. We learn to wait on God when we give up control, right? The Father chooses to love him, and he's not sure how this story's going to end. And then we also, lastly, we develop greater detachment. That almost sounds Buddhist, but it's not. So a lot of the things that early in our life we would cling to, we begin to, as we mature in Christ, what we begin to do. And you know this, right? I mean, remember in high school? I mean, I can remember when my world ended when I had a pimple. I'm not kidding. You go, whoa, you know, or I can remember what it felt like to see my name on the cut list for the high school basketball team. I'm telling you, that was one of the great achievements of my life. And then I sat on the bench. And one of my best friends didn't make the team. Is that a big deal? Really? I don't know if I should tell the story, but I was in a community play of Sound of Music as a kid, and I had the role of the adolescent Nazi. That's not something you put on a resume, Paul. But there was a very beautiful young woman in our school, and she and I had a couple scenes together, and I thought, yeah, it was kind of my claim to fame. She became a fashion model. And at the high school reunion, I mentioned that. She said, what? Never mind. But detachment, we stop letting the little things our lives or take up our lives. Stop letting that happen. I can still remember, and I may have told you the story, I can remember when I was going to Bloomington First Church, and I called a friend of mine who'd been an associate with me for years, and I said to her, I think I'm going to put my doctoral bars on my robe. I graduated with a doctorate in 1997 or 19, I can't even remember what year it was, 1995. I got this doctoral degree, and I told her I'm going to go to Bloomington. I think I'll find somebody to put my doctoral bars on my room. And my friend, there's like 10 seconds of silence. So when did you graduate? I said, oh, about 10 years ago. And she said, so having the doctoral bars on your robe wasn't important until now? You're going to do that to impress who? I just was quiet. I'll forgive it. I just wanted to impress all you. Let it go. I've got people who I love very much who are hoarders, and all the stuff they own now owns. Last story as we're done. So years ago at a church staff meeting at a church in Elkhart, I asked our staff to have a weekly staff meeting. We're gathered in this room, and I said to them, I said, so tell me how you're doing. And there was a moment of silence, and then one of our staff began to tell me what they were doing. And he began to list all the things he was up to, and then I interrupted finally when he calmed down. And I said, I didn't ask what you're doing. I asked, I want to know how you're doing. So we all began to talk. I can remember that in that day, there was a moment of silence, and I told the staff, I said, years in my life. I said, other than the birth of a granddaughter, no. And I told them, I said, every time I turned around, there seemed to be another challenge, and the room got quiet. They didn't know any of that. They worked with me. That really good. So I gutted it out. Today I shared my brokenness with our team. One of the worst. Is it okay not to be under control? Is it okay to hurt? Is it okay to be ragged? Is it okay to be thinking about the father this week? I've been thinking about the brothers this week, the boys. And what counted for the father wasn't being looking right. It wasn't impressing his neighbor. It wasn't being in control or pretending to do exactly what to do or what would happen next. Well, the boy who came back in the shadows, seeing the music on the boat, decided to let down. Lord God, sometimes we live our lives as if we are wearing a pair of 34 waist pants when what we need is a 36. With our breath, we try to make everybody think we've got it all together. We try to figure it all out. We try to control our family. We try to control the church. We try to maintain a certain kind of image, and it is absolutely exhausting. And really critical of others. So come, Holy Spirit. Somehow, in the mystery and the love for us, Jesus, somehow help us go of you. Step in to the wheel.